Three surfers disappeared in 1986, 27 years. Later, a lifeguard found the sun blazed intensely over the coast of Santa Cruz, California. It was the summer of 1986 and a secluded beach, almost forgotten between steep cliffs and a dense forest, received only the soothing murmur of the waves and the laughter of three young friends. Mark, Tiffany, and Daryl had turned that hidden corner of the world into their private sanctuary. There, they could forget the pressure, worries, and inner struggles each of them carried. "Hey, Mark, is that all you've got?" joked Tiffany from the sand, shielding her eyes from the golden glare of the sun. Her red hair danced in the warm wind, drawing smiles in the air. Mark, atop a cresting wave, turned smoothly on his board and waved exaggeratedly. "You haven't seen anything yet," he replied defiantly, diving skillfully into the white foam. Daryl, sitting near Tiffany, watched calmly from behind his inseparable sunglasses, indifferent to the fact that the sun was already beginning to dip toward the horizon. "He always shows off too much," Daryl commented in a mock disinterested tone. "One day, it's going to get him in trouble. And you never take those sunglasses off, do you?" laughed Tiffany. "At this rate, you'll have them permanently stamped on your face." Daryl barely smiled, gently touching the bridge of his nose, a gesture he always made when he felt vulnerable. "The glasses keep me protected," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Mark came running out of the water, soaked and smiling, breathing heavily. He tossed the board aside and dropped onto the sand next to his friends. Shaking his blonde hair, he sprayed them both. "What's up? Not drawing anything today, Tiff?" he asked, pointing at the abstract, curious patterns Tiffany usually sketched in the sand with a dry stick. Tiffany looked at him distractedly and began drawing slow circles and lines. "You know, I only do this when I need to think, or when something's bothering me." Mark frowned slightly with concern, starting to softly whistle the same sad melody he always hummed unconsciously when he felt uneasy. "Cut that out," Daryl jumped in. "It gives me goosebumps every time you do it." Mark stopped whistling abruptly, staring at the horizon. The sky had begun to glow orange and violet, foreshadowing the end of the day. "All right, we've got time for one last wave," said Mark, his energy returning. "Who's in?" The three of them exchanged a quick knowing glance and stood up with a burst of excitement. Their boards were back in the water in seconds, driven by the thrill of one last challenge. Laughter echoed one last time before they dove into the ocean, now darker, more unsettling. As they waited for the perfect wave, Tiffany floated closer to Mark, looking at him with sudden seriousness. "You okay? You seem off today." Mark avoided her gaze. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like someone's watching us," he said, lowering his voice and glancing nervously toward the shore. "But I guess I'm just being paranoid." "Don't say that. You're giving me chills," Tiffany replied. "Let's just enjoy the moment, okay?" Daryl slowly approached them, interrupting the conversation with a calm but steady voice. "It's coming. Get ready," he warned, pointing at a large wave rising steadily in the distance. Looming powerfully above them, the three friends began paddling hard, focused on riding that massive wall of water towering ahead. Mark felt his heart racing, a mix of anxiety and euphoria pushing him forward with every stroke. Back on the shore, in the shadows cast by the day's final rays over the nearby forest, a figure watched silently, hidden among the trees. Cold eyes followed every movement with an almost inhuman patience, waiting for the precise moment to act. Mark was the first to stand on his board, followed closely by Daryl and Tiffany. Adrenaline coursed through their bodies, driving them to challenge nature, to conquer that immense, furious wave. But in the middle of the action, Mark quickly glanced toward the beach and clearly saw the dark silhouette motionless among the trees. "Look over there!" Mark shouted in panic, pointing toward the shore. But before Tiffany or Daryl could react, the wave hit them hard, dragging them into the chaos of churning water. The ocean's roar became deafening. The world spun around them, and for an endless instant, there was only darkness and foam. The beach fell silent again, as if it had never been disturbed. The dark figure in the trees vanished without a trace, like a bad memory fading at dawn. Santa Cruz, California, July 2013. A violent storm had pounded the coast all through the previous night, leaving the beach scattered with branches, seaweed, and all kinds of marine debris. Jake Sullivan, the young lifeguard on duty, was slowly walking along the shore, checking that everything was in order after the storm. He had only been working there for a year, but he knew well the story of that forgotten beach-wrapped inn. Old mysteries the locals preferred not to talk about. As he walked along the damp, cold sand, Jake found it strange to be in a place that hadn't been visited regularly in so long. Part of him was curious, and another part felt a vague, inexplicable fear he couldn't quite place. Suddenly, his foot hit something hard buried under the sand, disturbed by the storm. He instinctively crouched down, puzzled. With his hands, he began to slowly dig through the wet sand, his breathing quickening without knowing why. Something inside him told him what he was about to uncover wasn't ordinary. The sand began to reveal the edge of a solid object, covered by years of time and forgetfulness. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he carefully unearthed the hidden mystery. "What is this? He whispered, his heart pounding wildly. His fingers touched the smooth surface of the object, struggling to pull it free. When he finally managed to dig it out completely, Jake froze. His breath caught in his chest. He had found something he never imagined he'd see there. Something that could forever change the fragile calm of that forgotten beach. Jake slowly raised his eyes toward the sea, now darker and deeper, as if holding secrets it had no intention of sharing. What had happened on that beach 27 years ago? What secret was that strange object hiding, buried beneath the sand? Those questions began flooding his mind as he held in his hand something he didn't fully understand, but he knew, without a doubt, that it marked the beginning of something much deeper, something disturbing and dark still hidden beneath the waves. And as he stared out at the horizon with a strange feeling growing in his chest, Jake knew that his life would never be the same after that morning. Jake Sullivan remained kneeling in the wet sand, his breath ragged, his heart pounding furiously in his chest. The cool, quiet morning contrasted sharply with the tension he felt holding that strange object, unearthed after decades hidden beneath the surface. With trembling hands, he slowly finished brushing away the remaining sand. His eyes widened in amazement as he clearly saw it was an old surfboard, visibly worn by years of salt and sea. Jake examined it carefully, fascinated by the faded colors and the remnants of 80s-style artwork. "What are you doing here, old friend?" he whispered to the board, as if it could answer. As he flipped it over, something else instantly caught his eye. Beneath the worn and dulled resin, he saw faded images embedded in the board's surface, like a collage frozen in time. Jake furrowed his brow and leaned in closer. Intrigued. The photos showed carefree scenes, 3 young surfers smiling, enjoying a sunny day. But as he studied the images carefully, a disturbing detail emerged. In almost every shot, distant, blurry figures were visible, clearly watching from the shore. He shivered. An inexplicable discomfort crawled up his spine as he stared at those distant silhouettes, like frozen ghosts, silently observing the unsuspecting surfers. One photo in particular stood out. It showed a young man in a police uniform with a stern, watchful expression. "This doesn't make any sense," Jake murmured under his breath. An uneasy feeling grew inside him as he studied the photo more closely. That face looked familiar. Where had he seen it before? Then a spark of recognition struck. Richard Mills? He whispered in shock. That young officer in the photo bore an uncanny resemblance to Richard Mills, the current mayor of Santa Cruz. But that was impossible. What was Mills doing watching those teens back in 1986? Was he somehow involved in their disappearance? Jake stayed on the beach until the sun began to rise higher, lost in thought. Finally, he decided to take the board back to his cabin, tucked behind a lifeguard post. There, on a makeshift table, he examined it again with calm focus. He needed to understand exactly what he had found. By sunset, the unease still hadn't left him. There was something disturbing about those images, something that seemed to beg him to investigate. Unable to resist, he decided to speak to some of the town's older residents, those who might remember that fateful summer. That same afternoon, he drove his old Jeep through the quiet streets of Santa Cruz and parked in front of the town's small cafe. He stepped inside slowly, giving a polite wave to Alice, a silver-haired woman known for her extraordinary memory. "Jake, sweetheart, what brings you here so late?" she asked with a kind smile, drying a mug behind the counter. "I need to talk to you about something I found on the beach," Jake replied seriously. "It's important." Alice put down the mug and leaned forward. "Curious. Tell me everything." Jake briefly described his discovery of the surfboard, mentioning the photos and the disturbing resemblance between the policeman and Richard Mills. Alice's smile slowly faded, replaced by a dark expression. "That summer in '86. She began softly. "It was strange. Very strange. What exactly do you remember?" Jake pressed, sensing he was on the right track. "The kids vanished just like that. The police investigated for a while, but things quieted down way too fast, like they wanted it closed as soon as possible." Alice lowered her voice, glancing nervously around. "Some folks said they saw strange things on the beach. Movement at night, strange lights. No one ever figured out what really happened. Was anything said about the police? About Mills?" Alice hesitated for a moment. Back then, Mills was just a young cop. Ambitious. I never fully trusted him, but there was no proof. Just rumors. Jake left the cafe more confused and more concerned than before. Every answer seemed to lead to new questions. What was really going on? Over the next few days, he continued interviewing older residents, collecting scattered testimonies that slowly formed a disturbing story about what might have happened that summer afternoon. Many remembered an unusually strong police presence that year. Others recalled seeing figures watching from a distance, similar to those in the photos on the board. As he went on, Jake realized he was touching something dangerous, something someone had tried to bury long ago. He decided to dig further and seek answers in the town's old records. One night, thanks to a longtime friend working at City Hall, he gained access to the municipal archive. He combed through files and old newspaper clippings. What he found shocked him: incomplete reports, contradictory statements, as if someone had gone out of their way to manipulate the truth. As he exited the building, he once again felt eyes on him from somewhere nearby. The constant sense of being watched was starting to get to him. This wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was fear. That night, he returned to his cabin hoping to sleep, but his mind wouldn't rest. The photos, the testimonies, the unsettling face of young Richard Mills all swirled in his thoughts. He decided to head back to the beach, hoping the night breeze would help calm his nerves. He walked slowly along the cold sand, watching the still ocean shimmer under the moonlight. What secrets did this place still hide? Then, a distant noise broke through his thoughts. He turned his head and spotted a dark car parked discreetly at the edge of the forest, a car he didn't recognize. Jake froze, his pulse racing. The vehicle remained still, its lights off, as if it were waiting for something. "Who are you?" he muttered, taking a cautious step forward. Suddenly, the engine roared to life. The headlights flared, briefly lighting up the night, and for a split second, Jake saw a figure behind the wheel, though he couldn't make out the face. The car sped off down the dirt road, disappearing into the darkness. Jake stood frozen. Watching it vanish, that deep sense of dread returned. His heart pounded, and he realized this investigation was no longer just a passing interest. He had opened a door someone was desperately trying to keep shut. And now, there was no turning back. Jake remained frozen on the sand, watching as the taillights of the mysterious car slowly vanished into the night, leaving behind an unsettling weight in his chest. He couldn't get that face out of his head, the man who looked so familiar. His thoughts swirled, desperately trying to make sense of everything that had happened. What have I gotten myself into? Jake thought, breathing deeply. The cold ocean breeze brushed his face, but it did nothing to ease the growing anxiety. Inside him, he knew he had crossed an invisible line, awakening a secret someone had tried to bury for more than 2 decades. He walked slowly toward his Jeep, parked near the lifeguard station, feeling his mind too clouded with doubts and fear to even consider sleep. As he drove slowly back home, one name kept circling in his mind: Walter Nolan. Walter had been a lifeguard on the beach back in the 80s, probably the only person who could shed some light on this mystery. Jake vaguely remembered old Walter always quiet and distant, living alone in a rundown cabin near the abandoned pier. Since Jake started working as a lifeguard, he had seen him only a few times, always withdrawn, avoiding any deep conversation. But if anyone knew anything about that time and the 3 missing teens, it was Walter Nolan. The next morning, after a restless night, Jake set off for Walter's small house near the old fishing port, tucked away behind thick bushes and aging trees. He parked a few meters away and walked toward the weathered wooden door. He knocked gently. "Walter? It's Jake Sullivan, the lifeguard. I need to talk to you." No response. He knocked again, more firmly. "Please, Walter. It's important." At last, the door creaked open slowly. Walter appeared, looking worn down, with suspicion in his tired eyes. "What do you want?" he asked with a hoarse voice, eyeing Jake with distrust. "I found something on the beach," Jake said, deciding to be honest. "Something connected to those 3 kids who disappeared in 1986. I need your help." Walter fell silent, visibly uncomfortable. "I don't know anything," he said coldly, beginning to close the door. Jake quickly put his foot in the doorway, stopping it from shutting completely. "I know you worked there back then, Walter. Please. I need to understand what happened. It's important." Walter stared at him, evaluating him intensely. Finally, he sighed deeply and opened the door wider, signaling Jake to come in. The small house smelled of damp wood and age. Yellowed photos lined the walls, and old trinkets were scattered everywhere. Walter sat in a worn chair and motioned for Jake to sit. "What exactly did you find?" he asked gravely. Jake described in detail the old surfboard, the strange embedded photographs, and the unsettling image of a young Richard Mills in a police uniform. Walter visibly tensed at the mention of that name. "You should forget what you saw," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Nothing good will come from digging up the past." Jake shook his head firmly. "I need to know the truth. What did you see, Walter? What really happened on that beach that summer?" Walter lowered his gaze to his aged hands, breathing heavily. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. That summer, something strange was going on at the beach at night. Lights, movement, things that made no sense. The kids, Mark, Tiffany, and Daryl, they saw something they weren't supposed to. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. What happened to them? Jake asked, feeling he was finally getting close to the truth. Walter hesitated, swallowing hard. "That afternoon, I was on duty when I saw something I never should have seen." Powerful men showed up in expensive cars. They were arguing with the kids, threatening them. Then he stopped, visibly shaken. "Then what, Walter?" "They took them," he finally said, his voice breaking. "I don't know where or what they did to them, but they forced them into a dark vehicle and disappeared." The next day, the police pretended to investigate, but nothing ever came of it. Richard Mills. He was there, Jake. He saw everything. Jake felt a cold wave rush through his body. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Walter looked at him with sorrow. "I was scared. They threatened me, told me if I spoke, I'd vanish just like they did. I was young and terrified, so I stayed quiet and lived with the guilt all these years." "But Jake, you shouldn't be involved in this. These people are still around, still powerful." Jake's mind flooded with unsettling images. Mills' stern expression in the photo, the shadowy figure on the beach, the dark car watching him from the trees. "Someone has to do something," Jake said with resolve. "It's time this comes to light." Walter looked at him with resignation, but also admiration. "Be careful, Jake. You don't know who you're up against." Jake left the cabin with his mind racing. He had gotten answers, but at the same time, had stepped deeper into dangerous territory. As he approached his car, that same chilling sensation returned, the feeling of being watched. He looked around cautiously. There it was again. In the distance, the same dark car parked near the trees, silently watching him. His heart began to race. He felt fear, but also a growing determination not to back down. Quickly, he got into his vehicle and drove home. He needed to clear his head. Once inside, he shut the door firmly behind him. As he tried to calm himself, his phone suddenly vibrated, startling him. He pulled it from his pocket and stared at the screen anxiously. The number was unknown. With a racing heart, he opened the message. "Stop now while you still can, or you'll be next." Jake felt the air leave his lungs, cold sweat running down his forehead. He sank into his chair, holding the phone with trembling hands. This wasn't just an old mystery anymore. It was now a direct threat. For the first time since this investigation began, Jake fully understood the danger he was in. But deep down, he also knew he couldn't walk away now. He had awakened voices from the past that someone had tried to silence for far too long. And now, those voices demanded justice. Jake sat motionless at the makeshift desk in his small house. The pale light of a table lamp faintly illuminated his tired face, while the soft, steady sound of the ocean drifted through the open window. In his trembling hands, he still held his phone, the threatening message glaring on the screen. "Stop now while you still can, or you'll be next." His mind was a storm of doubts. He knew perfectly well he was treading into dangerous territory, and by moving forward, he was putting his own life at risk. But he also knew he couldn't live with himself if he ignored what he had discovered. He couldn't let those missing teens remain forgotten. They deserved justice, and he might be their only chance at it. Jake took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and made a decision. He would keep going. The next morning started early. Jake drove quickly to the municipal archives, anxiety boiling in his chest. Luckily, an old friend, Clara Reynolds, worked there. Clara was a kind, middle-aged woman, known for her efficiency and her incredible memory of local history. When Jake walked into the archive, Clara looked up, surprised. "Jake, what a surprise. What brings you here?" "Hey, Clara," Jake greeted her with a strained smile. "I need access to the 1986 records." "It's really important." Clara's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Jake, those files are confidential." "Why would you want something that old?" Jake hesitated a moment, then leaned in and lowered his voice. "I'm looking into what happened to those missing surfers. I think someone's covering up the truth." Clara's face went slightly pale. "All right, but you don't have much time. If anyone asks, you weren't here." Jake nodded, grateful. Clara led him to a small room, filled with shelves and boxes stacked with dusty files, where he began to comb through the records. Minutes crawled by as he sifted through old papers and faded photographs. While examining police records from 1986, something stood out. Many files were incomplete, pages torn out, missing dates, inconsistent statements. It became clear that someone had deliberately tampered with the evidence. "This can't be a coincidence," Jake muttered to himself. Uneasy. After several hours, he left the archive feeling even more disturbed. He needed more context. He decided to visit the families and close friends of Mark, Tiffany, and Daryl, hoping for more personal insight. His first stop was at the home of Emily Barnes, Tiffany's younger sister, who still lived in Santa Cruz. When he arrived, Emily greeted him with suspicion, but at the mention of her sister's name, her expression softened. "What exactly do you want to know?" Emily asked, inviting him inside. Jake sat on an old sofa, looking at her seriously. "I need to understand what was going on in your sister's life before she vanished. Did you notice anything strange?" Emily let out a deep sigh, her eyes moistening slightly. "Tiffany was restless those last few days," she began slowly. "One night, just before she disappeared, she came home terrified. She said she had seen something on the beach, something involving powerful people in town. She was too scared to give me details, but she clearly mentioned that Richard Mills, who was a cop back then, was involved." Jake felt a chill down his spine at hearing that name again, the current mayor. "Did she say anything else?" Emily shook her head. "Only that strange things were happening on the beach at night. I thought she was exaggerating. I never imagined she'd vanish forever." Leaving Emily's house, Jake felt even more certain that Mills was the key figure in this mystery. He next visited Alex Carson, an old friend of Daryl's, who also remembered seeing unusual vehicles near the beach days before the incident. "I never mentioned it to anyone," Alex said uneasily. "I thought they were illegal fishermen or something. But Daryl always said they weren't. He said they were dangerous people." Jake returned home exhausted, yet determined. He had spent the entire day gathering testimonies and connecting the dots. He felt increasingly isolated and exposed. He knew he was being watched, but he couldn't back down now. As he neared his house, unease twisted in his gut. The front door was slightly ajar. His pulse quickened as he stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the entrance. He gently pushed the door open, his heart pounding in his throat. As he stepped inside, he froze. Everything was ransacked. Papers scattered across the floor. Furniture overturned, cabinets torn open. A shiver ran through his entire body. Someone had clearly been there, either searching for something or sending him a message. Oh my God! Jake whispered, surveying the chaos around him. He stepped cautiously through the mess until he reached his desk. There, amid the destruction, was a white envelope placed neatly in the center. He picked it up with trembling hands, his breath quickening. Inside was a small folded sheet. He opened it and read the words, written in large, bold, threatening letters. Final warning. Jake felt the air rush out of his lungs. He collapsed into a nearby chair, still clutching the note. His whole body trembled, but something inside him hardened in that moment. He looked again at the chaos around him. There was no turning back now. He had stirred something dark, something buried for decades. Someone powerful wanted to keep the past hidden. At any cost, he breathed deeply, trying to calm himself. Though fear gripped him, a stronger force had begun to rise. Resolve. He knew that if he gave in to the threats now, everything he had uncovered would disappear forever into the shadows, and he couldn't allow that. Jake knew he had definitively crossed a dangerous line. More than ever, he was determined to face whoever wanted to silence him. He looked at the note one last time, clenching it tightly in his fist, knowing the real danger was only just beginning. The answers were close, but so was the threat. Jake understood that from this moment on, every step he took could be his last, but he was willing to risk everything to finally expose the hidden threads of the truth. Jake woke with a bitter taste in his mouth, still shaken by the chaotic scene he had found in his home. He had spent the night wide awake, unable to sleep, his mind flooded with questions and the threatening warning echoing over and over again. Despite the fear gnawing at him, a deep resolve had taken hold. He couldn't stop now. While sipping coffee in his cluttered kitchen, his phone vibrated on the table. Jake flinched, staring at it warily before picking it up. He took a deep breath and checked the message once again from an unknown number. If you want the truth, go to the old abandoned lighthouse in Santa Cruz tonight, alone. A chill ran down his spine. He clenched the phone tightly, wondering if it was another trap or if someone, at last, was trying to help him from the shadows. His heart pounded, knowing unimaginable danger awaited him if he followed the message. But he also understood that not going might mean losing his only real chance to uncover the truth. All day, he tried to distract himself, but the anxiety grew stronger with every hour. Finally, as night fell, Jake grabbed a flashlight, a small portable radio, and the keys to his Jeep. He drove toward the old lighthouse perched on a rocky cliff overlooking the ocean. When he arrived, the wind blew cold, carrying the scent of salt, dampness, and rust. The lighthouse, battered by decades of neglect, loomed tall and menacing against the night sky. Jake stepped out slowly, hearing the crunch of gravel and dry grass beneath his feet. The lighthouse door was ajar, swaying slightly in the wind, an eerie invitation. Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped inside cautiously. His eyes slowly adjusted to the dimness, revealing peeling walls, worn floors, and a rusted staircase spiraling upward toward the old lamp room. But something else caught his attention immediately, a half-hidden trapdoor on the floor. He approached slowly, a knot tightening in his throat as he carefully lifted the rotting wooden hatch. Beneath it, a metal staircase led down into total darkness. Clutching his flashlight, Jake began to descend, his pulse pounding louder with every step. The air grew thick and damp, filled with the stench of mildew and confinement. At the bottom, his light revealed a narrow hallway ending in a hidden underground chamber. The walls of the room were covered with aged photographs, taped with yellowed corners, brittle with time. A cold shiver ran through Jake's body as he realized what he was seeing. Images of dozens of missing people spanning years. He stepped closer, heart pounding. Among the faces were the ones he knew too well: Mark, Tiffany, and Daryl. The young surfers smiled from their photographs, frozen forever in eternal youth. Jake felt sick thinking about what had likely happened to them in that dreadful place. "You finally found it," said a deep, cold voice from the shadows. Jake spun around. Flashlight raised its beam, landing on the face of Mayor Richard Mills, who stepped forward slowly, his expression cold and absolutely unwavering. "Why did you do this?" Jake asked, his voice trembling, trying to keep the fear at bay. Mills smiled faintly, a chilling look that froze Jake's blood. "They were witnesses, Sullivan. They saw something they shouldn't have, an operation meant to remain hidden forever. Do you have any idea how much money flows through illegal maritime trafficking? Too much to let 3 kids ruin everything." Jake took a step back, subtly slipping his hand toward the small radio in his pocket, pressing the transmit button. He needed to keep Mills talking just long enough for someone to hear the confession. "You call that a business? You destroyed innocent lives. They were just kids." Mills stepped closer, eyes dark and threatening. "Sometimes, Jake, innocence comes at a price. They weren't the first, and they won't be the last. Money and power justify many things in this world. You should have taken the warning." Jake felt his legs tremble slightly. He was in real danger now. Who else knows about this, Mills? Who else is involved? The mayor grinned darkly. "More people than you could ever imagine. Corruption runs far deeper than your mind could grasp. You should have stayed out of it. Now it's too late." Mills motioned toward the shadows, and Jake heard someone else shift in the darkness. His pulse surged. He was cornered. He stepped back, instinctively searching for an escape, but stumbled, his shoulder hitting the cold wall lined with photographs. "It's a shame, Sullivan. I thought you were smarter than this," Mills said mockingly. "Now you'll have to disappear too." The mayor raised his hand, signaling the figure behind him. Jake's heart thundered. He knew every second mattered. He needed to stall just long enough. "You won't get away with this, Mills," Jake muttered, fury boiling in his voice. "The truth will come out." Mills laughed coldly, taking slow steps toward him. "The truth? The truth is only what I say it is. And you won't be around to tell anyone otherwise." Just then, distant sirens echoed from above. Jake's heart leapt with hope, but before he could react, he felt a sharp, brutal blow to the back of his head. Pain exploded through his skull, blinding, searing. The images around him blurred, the sirens fading into a distant hum. His legs gave way, and he collapsed onto the cold, damp floor of the basement. The flashlight rolled from his hand, its beam flickering across the wall of frozen smiles. As darkness closed in around him, Jake wondered desperately if the sirens would arrive in time. His limbs grew heavier, his vision dissolved into blackness. His final thought was a silent prayer that he would wake again, that the truth wouldn't be buried forever in the shadows of the old abandoned lighthouse. A sharp sting slowly pierced Jake's consciousness, forcing him out of the dark abyss where he had fallen. He slowly opened his eyes, trying to focus through the thick shadows around him. His head throbbed with pain, and a heavy dizziness swept over him. He tried to sit up, only to realize his hands were tied behind his back with rough rope cutting into his wrists. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He scanned the space with difficulty. He was inside an old storage room near the abandoned lighthouse. The walls were rusted and damp, and the air was thick with the smell of salt and aging metal. Outside, He could faintly hear the constant roar of waves crashing against the rocks. Jake struggled to recall how he had ended up there, and the image of Mayor Richard Mills striking him returned violently to his mind. Frustration and rage surged through him. He knew he had little time. If he didn't act quickly, he could become just another forgotten face on that dark basement wall. With great effort, he shifted toward a corner, searching blindly for anything sharp enough to cut through the ropes. His fingers frantically groped through the shadows until they brushed against a jagged piece of rusted metal. With determination, he began sawing at the bindings, ignoring the pain as the sharp edges dug into his skin. At last, the ropes gave way. Jake gasped with relief, freeing his aching hands and quickly searching for a way out. At the back of the storage room, he noticed a small window boarded with decaying planks. He tugged at them until they cracked and crumbled in his hands. The sound made him tense. Someone might hear. When the window was finally clear, Jake climbed through, feeling the cold night air hit his face. Outside, he immediately heard distant sounds, voices, police sirens, flashing lights breaking through the dark. The police were there, alerted by the radio transmission he'd managed to send before being attacked. His heart raced with relief and dread. He ran cautiously toward the lights, shouting for help. Several officers spotted him and rushed over with expressions of shock and concern. "We've got Sullivan. He's here," one officer shouted. A young female officer gently grabbed his shoulders, noticing the dried blood on his head. "Are you okay? Can you walk?" Jake nodded weakly, still dazed. "I'm fine. He's behind all of it," he managed to say. "We know, Jake," another officer replied, his expression grim. "We caught Mayor Mills a few minutes ago. We heard everything, thanks to your transmission, but you need to come with us. There's more you need to see." Jake followed the officers to a tent set up near the lighthouse. Inside, he was horrified to find photographs, old documents, and personal belongings scattered across tables. Images of dozens of missing people covered every visible surface. "We found all of this in the hideout under the lighthouse," a detective explained in a grave tone. "This goes far beyond the three surfers from '86. They've been doing this for decades." Mills and other high-ranking officials were part of an illegal trafficking operation. Anyone who saw too much was eliminated. Jake's knees buckled slightly at the devastating revelation. So many years of silence. So many innocent lives. In the following hours, the news exploded through the small community of Santa Cruz. Police, reporters, and locals filled the area. Jake became the face of the uncovered truth, receiving interviews and congratulations, though all he felt was a mix of sadness and quiet relief. As dawn approached, Jake sat on a rock near the lighthouse, watching the soft light slowly rise over the ocean. Tears welled in his eyes for everything that had happened. So many lives destroyed to protect hidden interests. Suddenly, a gentle hand touched his shoulder. It was Clara Reynolds, the friend who had helped him access the town archives. "You've been incredibly brave, Jake," she said warmly. "This town owes you everything." He shook his head sadly. "I just did what was right. I only wish I'd done it sooner." Just then, a uniformed officer approached them quickly, his expression urgent. "Jake, I need to speak with you." "Right now," he said in a quiet but firm voice. Jake stood immediately, alarmed by the officer's tone. "What is it?" The officer hesitated for a moment, then took a breath and spoke. "Listen, we've got Mills, but he wasn't acting alone. We know there's a key accomplice still out there. Someone who helped him keep this whole thing buried for years." Jake's heart began to race again. More people involved? Who else could be behind this? Who is it? He asked, tension rising in his voice. The officer glanced briefly at Clara, then fixed his eyes on Jake, clearly uncomfortable. We haven't caught them yet, but we've confirmed their identity. Jake, it's someone close to you. Very close. Jake felt the ground shift beneath him. His breath caught, frozen in a moment of disbelief. What? No, that's not possible, he whispered, trying desperately to stay calm. Who is it? The officer slowly shook his head. I can't tell you yet, but soon you'll have to face them. I'm sorry. Jake stood still, unable to move, the shock settling deep into his chest. Someone he trusted, someone close, had been part of the conspiracy from the very beginning. The revelation left him stunned, paralyzed by the emotional blow. Nausea twisted in his stomach at the thought of who could have betrayed him. As the officer slowly walked away, Jake remained rooted to the spot, staring silently out to sea. Questions flooded his mind, but none came with answers. The pain of this new truth struck deeper than any physical wound. The deepest betrayals always come from those you never imagined capable of them. As the sun rose slowly over the horizon, Jake knew his nightmare wasn't over. The final and most devastating truth had yet to come. The cold ocean breeze brushed softly against Jake's face as he slowly walked toward the beach at Santa Cruz, a place that now symbolized both pain and revelation. His mind echoed with the police officer's confession from minutes earlier, a revelation that shook him to his core. Walter Nolan, he never would have imagined it. The thought seemed impossible. Walter, the retired lifeguard, that quiet yet always kind man who had mentored him since his first day on the job, had been an accomplice to Mayor Mills for years. Every step Jake took across the damp sand felt heavier than the last. There stood Walter, facing the sea, as if he had been waiting for him. Jake stopped for a moment, breathing deeply before moving forward. Why, Walter? Jake asked, his voice cracking with disappointment. Why you? Walter didn't turn. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, waves crashing just a few feet in front of him. His voice came out, weighted with sorrow. I never meant for it to go this far, Jake. Believe me. I never imagined it would. Then explain it to me, Walter. Jake pressed, his anger restrained. I need to understand why you betrayed those people. Why you betrayed me. Finally, Walter turned slowly to face him, his eyes glassy with guilt. I was a coward. That's the only explanation. When Mills threatened me, fear froze me. I saw what they did to Mark, Tiffany, and Daryl. And instead of stepping in, I kept silent. I convinced myself that by staying quiet, no one else would get hurt. Jake's heart pounded. Disappointment mixed with compassion as he looked into Walter's tormented eyes. Why didn't you say anything when I came to you? Jake asked, his voice aching. Walter shook his head slowly, lowering his eyes in shame. I wanted to protect you, Jake, and to protect myself. But it was already too late. I was in too deep. I had stayed silent for too long. Jake walked closer, stopping just a few steps away. The steady sound of the ocean seemed to amplify the weight between them. What exactly happened that night, Walter? The old man inhaled deeply, staring down at the sand. The kids saw the illegal exchange from their surfboards. Mills and his partners were moving contraband through the beach. They had no idea what they were witnessing, but they became accidental witnesses. Mills noticed and sent men to silence them. I saw everything ... and I did nothing. Mills threatened to destroy me if I spoke. He paid me off to keep quiet. Not a single day has passed that I haven't regretted it. Jake, not one. Jake felt tears rising in his eyes. But you kept hiding it all these years, Walter. Do you know how many lives you destroyed with your silence? I know, Walter said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry, truly. I don't deserve your forgiveness or anyone's, but I can't carry it anymore. The guilt is too heavy. I'm tired, Jake. It's time this ended. At that moment, the sound of multiple footsteps approached them from behind. Walter slowly turned toward the officers, raising his hands in surrender. Jake didn't move, watching as they gently placed cuffs on the old lifeguard's wrists. Before being led away, Walter looked at Jake with a strange expression. "Jake, there's still more," he whispered, leaning in slightly. "There's still much to discover in those waters. Be careful." A cold chill ran down Jake's spine at those cryptic words. Walter was escorted toward the police vehicle, leaving Jake standing alone on the beach, filled with a persistent and unsettling feeling. The days that followed were chaotic. In Santa Cruz, the revelations about Mayor Mills, Walter Nolan, and the corruption ring turned the once peaceful coastal town upside down. Justice had finally arrived, but the emotional wounds ran deep and would take a long time to heal. Jake became the symbol of the fight for truth and justice, though he himself felt far from at peace. Walter's final warning echoed in his mind, filling him with questions that refused to fade. A week after the arrests, the community gathered for a solemn memorial to honor Mark, Tiffany, Daryl, and all the victims whose names had surfaced during the investigation. The beach was filled with flowers and candles, forming a glowing path across the sand. Families wept in each other's arms, finally finding a measure of peace in the truth. Jake, standing before the crowd, addressed them with a trembling voice. "We're here today to remember, to honor those who had no voice for so many years. Their bravery, their innocence, and their stolen lives must never be forgotten. Now it's our duty to protect one another, to uphold the truth, and to never let fear silence us again." The crowd stood in solemn silence, their faces turned to Jake with deep respect and gratitude. After the ceremony, Jake slowly walked to the shoreline, standing alone before the sea. Walter's words still haunted him. He stared at the waves with a strange mixture of calm and unease. What exactly did Walter mean? Jake wondered anxiously. Could something still be hidden beneath those waters? Had it really all ended, or were there threads left unraveled? The gentle sea breeze touched his face, as if trying to offer an answer he couldn't yet grasp. He gazed toward the horizon, searching for meaning in the old man's final message. A deep uncertainty settled in his chest, as if he sensed that the peace he'd found was fragile, temporary. A soft hand rested on his shoulder, pulling him gently from his thoughts. It was Clara, offering him a kind smile. "It's time to rest, Jake," she said warmly. "You've done enough for now." Jake offered a faint smile, glancing once more toward the ocean before turning to leave. "I hope you're right," he whispered, almost to himself, taking one last look at the mysterious waters that still seemed to guard so many secrets. "But something tells me this isn't over." And as he walked slowly away from the beach beside Clara, Jake couldn't help but wonder one last time if the whole truth had really come to the surface, or if part of it still lay buried in the dark, silent depths of those eternal waves.